Are Lokhust Destroyers better than their heavy counterparts, the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers with the Exterminator weapons? In this video, we're going to be exploring the reasons why you would take the Lokhust Destroyers over the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, and we're going to be discussing the pros and cons for both. Now, you'll find loads of maths in one of the previous videos we did with the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, where we were talking about going up against different toughness groups, so you'll find that video here. We won't be repeating all that maths in this video. So let's kick this thing off with the Lokhust Destroyers. Now those Lokhust Destroyers, you're going to take a unit of 6 of them because you can fit 6 in a unit. And we're going to take that Lokhust Lord again like we did in that previous video. That will total 260 points, which is actually 30 points more than the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers with their Lokhust Lord. So in fact, a single Lokhust Destroyer costs 30 points, so you can kind of consider it like 5 plus the Lokhust Lord would be equal to 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers and their Lord. So for comparison's sake, within this video, I'll be comparing 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers to 5 Lokhust Destroyers. So it's both 230 points. Now, of course, when you've got the Lokhust Lord in the unit, you're going to have 5 plus critical hit rolls. We know that already from the previous video. And that's going to be massive for this unit in particular because of their weapon. Now, we're going to go through the weapon first. In fact, let's do that now. That makes more sense, doesn't it? So the Lokhust Destroyers have got the Gauss cannons, which have lethal hits. That's the main part here. Lethal hits on a 5+ because of the Lokhust Lord. Only 24-inch range, 3 shots a man, hit on 3, strength 5, -2 AP and 2 damage. Now, of course, they've got their own unique ability. We'll go over that in a bit, in fact. But let's check out some comparisons and pros and cons for the Lokhust Destroyers against the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers. Let's start with the offense. The offense is the major part to this. They're obviously very deadly at range. Now, the threat range is a con. Well, it's not a con. You're not being conned. It's not a pro, it's a con. It's only 24 inches, whereas the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers with the Exterminators have got 36 inches. Although at rapid fire range, it'll only be 18 inches. So it's kind of mixed there, in fact, because you ideally want to be at rapid fire with the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, but there's no threat range at all for the Lokhust Destroyers from 25 inches onwards. In terms of shots, the Lokhust Destroyers have got 15 when you've got a 5-man unit, whereas you've got between 18 and 36 for the 3-man Lokhust Heavy Destroyer unit, again, depending on rapid fire range. But even if they're not, you've still got 18 shots there, which is more than the Lokhust Destroyers. In terms of strength 5 versus strength 6, so again, that's a bit of a disadvantage to the Lokhust Destroyers. So far, not so good. But this is where things start to change. When you're starting to look at the weapon itself, the weapon AP, it's -2 AP versus -1 AP. So going up against Space Marine armor, power armor, you're putting them on a 5+ armor save rather than a 4+ armor save. Of course, that doesn't take into consideration cover. -2 is pretty decent. And the damage is where it's all at. Damage 2 versus damage 1. You're removing intercessors with 1 dice roll. And even against the bigger stuff, it starts to stack up when you've got a few dice going through. Now that's the offense. What about defense? In terms of their own statistics from their data card, they're both toughness 6, so they're equal there. They've both got a 3+ armor save. Combined wounds total, if you've got 5 Lokhust Destroyers, of course you can't get 5 in a unit, but just for the sake of this comparison, that would combine to 15 wounds. Whereas the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers with 3, that would be 12 wounds. So there's less wounds there as a total combination. Model count, again, it's 5, so they're winning there, versus 3. And in fact, that's quite important because if you come up against damage 4 and beyond weapons, or even damage 2 weapons in a way, there's going to be some overkill. If a couple of damage 2 weapons go through onto a single Lokhust Destroyer, well, one of those damages goes to waste because they're only 3 wound models. And it's likewise with damage 4, 5, 6 and so on, because they're only damage 3 models, it's only going to hit that one model and remove it, 30 points. Whereas a Lokhust Heavy Destroyer, damage 4 weapon still removes it, and that will be 50 points. And finally, we're just going to throw in this in there, leadership. They've both got leadership 7+. So in terms of defense, the Lokhust Destroyers are better in terms of defense only, even though they've got less wounds per model, but you've got more models. So it kind of comes back and helps you out there, which is actually another point in itself. It's going to be more useful for reanimation protocols and a resurrection orb that your Lokhust Lord will be taking. Much easier to get models back if they're only 3-wheel models. Now we probably should touch upon the abilities next because they've both got very unique and different abilities. The Lokhust Destroyers have got the hardwired for destruction ability, so they're effectively getting to reroll hit rolls of a 1 against the closest eligible unit, and if they're on an objective they get to reroll everything, which is pretty nice, especially when you've got lethal hits. Now the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, they don't reroll hits, but they do reroll 1s to wound against non-monsters and non-vehicle units. That's with the exterminator weapons. Now personally I prefer the Lokhust Destroyers ability, the lethal hits, because, well, first of all we get them on a 5+, so a third of your dice are lethal, which means you don't need to worry about the toughness of your enemy units. Anything that isn't a 5+, I'd be re-rolling it if you've got the full re-rolls that is against an enemy unit on an objective. Just re-roll everything. Lethal hits is very important in this scenario. If they're not on an objective and they're the closest eligible unit, it's just going to be re-rolling 1s, which is fine, that's okay. And going back to those Lokhust Heavy Destroyers for a moment, if you're re-rolling 1s to wound, going up against toughness 3, you're wounded on 2s anyway, toughness 4, 5, you are wounded on 3s, but it's quite easy to wound those infantry screens if you like. So you don't necessarily need those rerolls, especially when you get quite a lot of hits, whereas it's a lot more important for the lethal hits with the Lokhust Destroyers. Now let's show you some figures for a full unit of 6 with a Lokhust Lord can do. So I've added that model back in now because this is now Math Hammer, it's more realistic. We want to have the full unit, which you can't get unit 5. So with the Gauss cannons, lethal hits, we've already gone through the data card or for the weapon itself. We don't need to recap on that. They're basically killing 12 guardsmen, 8 intercessors, 2 to 3 terminators, 2 to 3 eradicators, which are toughness 6 there. Toughness 7, you've got the Lokhust Custodians, which we used in the previous video. You can kill 2 of them. And against toughness 10 models, you're actually doing between 10 and 12 damage, which is mad, really. In fact, it's toughness 10 and beyond, isn't it? Because you're wounded on 6s anyway. But you're not really looking at that wound roll, you're looking at the lethal hit roll. Now, all those figures, all in all, are very similar to the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers that we did in the previous video with the maths. I mean, they do remove slightly less in terms of toughness 3, Guardians or Guardsmen. They're removing almost the same, in fact, with the Intercessors that are toughness 4, almost the same. Terminators, it was slightly under, and toughness 6 isn't that far behind either. But where they really do shine is the toughness 7 and beyond. That's where the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers start to struggle, because they're starting to wound on a 5+. Whereas these guys, the Lokhust Destroyers, they're lethal hitting. They get their lethal hits with a third of the dice, potentially re-rolling. So the toughness is literally irrelevant. So that's where they make up of it, and it becomes a lot more reliable. Again, going up against toughness 10, the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers were barely scratching it. 3 or 4, I can't remember what it was now. Was it like 3 or 4 damage in total? Whereas these guys are slapping 10 to 12. So there's a lot more damage because of the lethal hits and the -2 AP as well, and 2 damage, don't forget. Another advantage to mention while we're here is if you are taking the Lokhust Destroyers as opposed to the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, it means you've got room in your list to take 3 units of 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers with the Gauss Destructors, which a lot of people really do like, including myself. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds there, although that will be a lot of points as an investment, of course. Having maybe 18 Lokhust Destroyers and 9 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, that's a lot of points, but maybe that's what you want to do. It's just a shame we don't have a decent enough detachment to fulfill these destroyers, and I'm not going to go into the Annihilation Legion because that's more for melee, really, isn't it? That's for the Scorpion Destroyers. The Lokhust Destroyers against the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, I think they're actually better. I think they're better, you know. I mean, I need to start using them a lot more. I've not got enough models. I was kind of scared because I thought with the codex I thought we were going to get new models, so I didn't go out and purchase some more. I think they're better. Like I said, between toughness 3, 4, 5 and 6, they're sort of doing the same, and toughness 7 beyond, they're doing better. They've got a better durability in terms of their defense, which we went through earlier. The offense, the 24-inch range does bug me a little bit. I'm not going to lie, it does bug me a little bit. The strength 5 is okay. They do need to get a little bit closer. And there is one more thing, in fact, they've not got heavy. There's no heavy there. But what use is heavy if you're not within rapid fire range with the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers? So it is a toss-up. I'm going to have to get your opinions on this. In the comments down below, put which unit you prefer and why. And maybe give me some sort of explanation of what you would use your Lokhust Lord with. Like, what enhancement would you put on the Lokhust Lord to make the unit even better than it already is? Because you don't need the Horizon Tyrant because they're already rerolling hits. Maybe there's something else that you're using that I'm not. Also, guys, if you want to check out our Lokhust Heavy Destroyers math hammer, check it out in this video right here. You'll see all the maths for all the different toughness groups and how well they do on the battlefield.